Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I am Yves Vingler, and this is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. The Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a weekly a series on a critical look on Canadian foreign policy. And there's a lot that is going on here in the world, a lot of pretty wild developments. This has been a very busy week, so I think I'll just get right to it. The Canadian Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, Jacqueline O'Neill, that the Trudeau government appointed a while ago. She was awarded the Vimy Award for this year. The Vimy Award is given out by the Conference of Defense Associations, which is a grouping of a bunch of military organizations, veterans organizations, and the like, that gets millions of dollars from arms companies. So that tells us a little bit about their ambassador for women, peace, and security. That she would accept that and they would give that to her. The Canadian government announced its support for the UN resolution backing a military deployment to Haiti, and offered to help the UN intervention that will be led by Kenya. The Kenyan foreign minister told the New York Times that they expected to last 3 years and to involve between 10 and 20,000 officers from up to 50 countries. Who knows if this is actually going to happen? The Canadian government's announcing that it's going to send police. They also talked about how Canada's in charge of the International Security Assistance Coordination Group, which is basically managing support for the Haitian police and getting equipment, training, and the like from different countries. They said up to 26 countries, providing some forms of assistance. And as part of their public relations on this mission, it's a UN okayed mission, but the UN's not actually funding it. It's mostly the Americans that are funding it. And there was a Canadian Press article quoted in a bunch of media. The Globe and Mail headline was, "Canada focused on preventing sexual violence in Haiti as military intervention looms." Well, back in 2019, when CBC did a story, there's been a whole bunch of academic studies that showed how much sexual assault and violence and just breaking of the rules, the UN force, the MINUSTA occupation force from 2004 to 2017, how much they were involved and how many babies, the Team MINUSTA, the small MINUSTA in Creole, huge numbers of babies left, single mothers, the foreign troops leave. Canadians, I think, were, in one study showed it was the fifth or sixth or seventh biggest of these fatherless children, which of course breaks UN rules. They're not supposed to be having sex with locals, and because of the power relations. The CBC in 2019 published a story detailing a series of examples of RCMP officers found to be involved in sexual violence, and with very good evidence. And all that happened to them is they were sent home because there's immunity. They have immunity. And of all the examples of rape and sexual misconduct, I think there was only one soldier, I believe, from Uruguay that was ever confirmed to have actually been brought before the courts or gone to jail in Uruguay for what he did in Haiti. And so in 2019, when the CBC did this report on this, Chrystia Freeland, then the foreign affairs minister, said, this is horrible what the Canadians who were supposed to be protecting the Haitians, what they did, these Canadian men, and we will look into we will change the legislation that grants them immunity. 4 years later, nothing, of course. But here you are 4 years later, and the Canadian press just goes along with this idea that what Canada's objective in Haiti is to, prevent sexual violence. With regards to India, India's assassination, or presumed, I should say presumed, people complained, I think rightfully so, in some of the messaging I put out either last week or the week before, where I didn't make it clear that this is there's no proof that's been put certainly before a court of law, or even necessarily put forward in the public domain. But the presumed or the alleged Indian assassination of Harjit Nijjar in Surrey back in June. There's been lots of fallout coming from that. India's expelled many Canadian diplomats. I think they're saying like 40. It's still making major headlines, front page news, the Financial Times, the British paper. Opinion pieces like one in the Financial Times: West cannot ignore a murder in Canada. The Indian media is pretty wild on this stuff. I've dipped into paying attention to some of the Indian media, and I got to say, there is I know people, an interview I did, which I'll get to in a second. She made it clear that there's a very kind of very hard line ethos building up in Indian political culture. But one story, there were stories about how Trudeau apparently had cocaine on his airplane to when he went to New Delhi, I guess a month ago or so. All these really wild accusations that are coming out, this real hostility towards Trudeau in India, though they're not necessarily explicitly denying that they were responsible, the intelligence agency was responsible for the assassination. All this anti-Canadian kind of sentiment. And one of the stories says, Nijjar was gay, Trudeau liked him. BJP leader Baga makes sensational claim amid India-Canada standoff. So I didn't even read the story, but I just the headline. They're I don't know, suggesting there was some whatever relationship between the Sikh activist that was assassinated and Trudeau. Pretty wild kind of stuff coming out of India, I have to say. And there's also some pretty intense divisions within the Liberal Party on this. The one Liberal MP, Chandra Arya, told the CBC that Hindu Canadians are fearful because Sikh separatist supporters in Canada are not being punished for public displays of support for Palestine. And he believes if there's any blood, it's going to be Hindu Canadian blood. So he's actually, this is an MP, a Liberal MP, suggesting that Sikh Canadians are going to be causing Hindu blood in Canada. This is it seems pretty kind of removed from, I'm obviously not particularly knowledgeable about internal Indian Canadian divisions within the diaspora community, but there's clearly the major divisions. The New York Times published this long piece about a week ago that I didn't see until after last week's episode, titled Modi Policies Fuel Tension in Canada's Indian Diaspora. And it basically shows how the Modi government, with its hardline Hindu nationalist, exclusivist outlook, has been basically stoking all kinds of tension. So there's a Friends of the BJP, which is the Modi's party, established in 2014. This story talks about how they got the Indian diplomats in Toronto, pressed Brampton City Council to ban a cultural festival that had a pavilion devoted to the Punjab. Punjab, of course, is the only predominantly or majority Sikh province, and it would be the basis of the Khalistan. So there is some serious dynamics. I did an interview, people can check out on my YouTube channel. It's also on the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute channel, that delves into some of this background and some of the politics in India and the also the division that the Indian government is stoking within Canada and the interference. I also the India question is completely tied to this foreign interference thing that we get so much discussion about from China, but there's a lot of evidence that India is deeply involved in Canadian politics, but India is viewed as an ally as part of the containing of China. So it gets a pass on a lot of the stuff, and the China stuff is obviously very much hyped as part of justifying the US empire's stoking of tensions. On the climate front, there's many stories. It's almost daily, bad news stories. Le Devoir had a story about 1.5 degrees. We're going to hit that by 2034. Another story, winter peak of Antarctic sea ice is likely lowest ever recorded. The Financial Post and National Post business section had a story titled, "Read Between Zelensky's Lines. Canada must export more oil and gas." So basically making the argument that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's speech to House of Commons, he mentioned something about Russian oil and gas, and of course the solution to that is to just ramp up more Canadian tar sands or more Canadian oil extraction. So they're continuing to use the proxy war for their extractivist ecocidal policies. The Globe and Mail yesterday, or the Saturday issue, had a piece titled "A Year After Nord Stream Pipeline Attacks, Germany Struggles While US is Delighted." And it's that Eric Reguli, who's generally kind of more sort of serious Globe Mail business section reporter. And he's the only one that I remember that really delved into Seymour Hersh's accusation that the US blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. And he goes back over some of this. Of course, I'm pretty sure that he personally believes that Hersh is correct, but he kind of goes through some of the other allegations. It's remarkable how little interest the Canadian media has had in following up on that story. The Canada Files published a piece, Canadian MP admits to NATO proxy war using Ukraine to fight Russia. And it's based upon this Toronto Star article, which is titled "Growing Concern Over Cracks in Canadian Support for Kyiv." So basically showing that there's a breakdown of political support among the public for the proxy war. But in the story, they quote this Tom Kimichich, who's a conservative, I believe, MP somewhere in Ontario, who's also a member of the Canadian NATO Parliamentary Association. And he basically says they're fighting for us. But he also points out that it's quote, a battle the West has been preparing for since the Cold War. Which, we also, not long ago, the Secretary General of NATO stated that before Russia's invasion, that Putin and Russia sent requests for non-expansion of NATO, and that was what precipitated the invasion. So here you have a Canadian MP that's kind of going down that, suggesting that this has been sort of on the cards, and the West was aware of it for a while. Terry Glavin continues in his National Post, gives you a little window into the real crazy element of the Canadian intelligentsia. And he has this column, which is basically, I don't know how you would get here without nuclear war, so which means you wouldn't get to what he's claiming. He says every last Russian asset oligarchs should lose their entire property and stock portfolio in every country, in every NATO country. Moscow should have fallen by now, and by now we should have been hunting to the ends of the earth every Russian general, torturer, rapist, and child killer, and every Russian implicated in any way in Ukraine's suffering and desolation. So Moscow should fall, and we should be pursuing all of the Russian war criminals all around the earth. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, Glavin, that will not happen. And if that was on the cusp of happening, that would lead, of course, to Moscow using its biggest or second biggest nuclear stockpile in the world, and that would not be good for anyone. Continuing down though, the kind of some of the crazy elements of the establishment. Paul Krugman, the New York Times columnist, who's kind of like a lefty economist. I mean, lefty in the social democratic Keynesian economist, but he comes across as sort of leftish in certainly in U.S. domestic policy. And he has this piece that's just this raw. It's called "Why MAGA Wants to Betray Ukraine," and in the piece, he boasts about how NATO's been strengthened, the free world has been strengthened, Western weapons have proved their effectiveness. What else? He says, he says, let's not forget that Ukrainians are doing the fighting and dying. So even, this sort of fight to the last Ukrainian, we're getting all these geopolitical benefits, and it's just the Ukrainians dying. This is still a lot of the thinking on the proxy war floating around out there is pretty wild. Now, continuing on with the Nazigate, there were many more developments on that front in the last recent days. The University of Alberta, more of these reports about their receiving more than $1.4 million from former SS family members, or for donations honoring former SS. And I don't think I've delved into it. I did an interview with a former University of Alberta alumni who's now a prof at Sweden, university in Sweden, Pers Girdling. You can see that also on my YouTube channel, and I invite people to subscribe to my YouTube channel, because I'm going to be putting more and more videos up there throughout the week, because there's so many developments that deserve much greater attention than they're getting. And he in this interview, he's somebody he's actually a supporter of the NATO proxy war, but he's done some really good research, writing for back 15 years about all these former Nazis who are the University of Alberta have been praising. This university, the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies at University of Alberta, set up in '76. It was co-founded by Peter Savarin, who fought in the Hunka's Waffen 14th Division, and they got like almost $500,000 is to the Kubachich. I'm forgetting his first name. He was leading Nazi propagandists, worked closely with Christopher Freeland's grandfather. He oversaw Christopher Freeland's grandfather, essentially. A Nazi propagandist in then Poland, now Western Ukraine, and so they have a big endowment for him. So there's more than a dozen of these people, more than $1.4 million. Now, what's interesting about this whole Ukrainian studies thing is how influential they've been in whitewashing the Galicia SS, in Ukrainian nationalism, pushing a certain type of Ukrainian nationalism. The whole Holodomor, they were at the center of the first monument ever. Was this Ukrainian Studies department at University of Alberta that was set up by former SS figures, and they're the ones who had the first ever monument to the Holodomor. And of course, the Holodomor is used as this claim that Stalin imposed a genocide on Ukrainians, which justifies that. So this supposedly happened in the early 1930s. There was a terrible famine, and my interview goes into it with the University of Sweden professor. But there was a terrible famine, but there's no real evidence that there was an effort to actually, wipe out Ukrainians. And even in fact, where Ukrainians, where they were most hit by this, is not where the SS 14th Division was, the Waffen Division was set up back in Western Ukraine. It was actually more in Eastern Ukraine. But this is used today by these people to justify, so the Nazis had the Holocaust against European Jewry, and the Soviets had a Holocaust against, or genocide against us. So we were caught in an impossible position. And so us joining the Nazis to fight Stalin was legitimate. That's essentially how it's used politically. And to see these SS guys, and it's fascinating. It's all openly on their website, the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. It's open on their website about the role they played. It's also this former SS guy. They talk about how most of the resources early on, when they're set up in the mid-1970s, the second Ukrainian Studies department anywhere in the world, most of the resources went into building this Ukrainian encyclopedia that was overseen by this Nazi propagandist. And the university, was working with him, Alberta University. So I delve into some of this stuff with the Hers Anders Rudling, the university Swedish professor that people can see on the website. There's now the Nazigate. There's other elements. A couple things on the Nazigate. The World Social website has a story titled "Government-backed Ukrainian Canadian Congress chides don't, quote, besmirch the reputation of Nazi Waffen SS veteran Hunka." So they put out some statement defending Hunka. They also, I should say, the UCC put out a statement, condemns the terrorist attacks against the people of Israel. Terror and terrorism must be condemned and defeated. So they never put out anything about Hunka criticizing the Hunka Gate, the Nazi Gate, but they've joined the chorus, which we'll get to on the Palestinian question. Now, in this Nazigate business, before that, so Zelensky a few days ago gave a battalion of Ukrainian armed forces the honorary name of Yevhen Konovalets, who's the founder of the Banderas, what becomes Banderas group of Ukrainian nationalists, and who were involved in the massacre of Jews, Poles, and Ukrainians during World War II. And there was also Zelensky, apparently, according to online images, and I haven't seen it confirmed by a major outlet, but he was given about 5, 6, 7 days ago a flag of the SS Waffen 14th Division that the Hunka was part of. And by the defense, an element of the Ukrainian military. So that may have been response to the Hunka incident. It's not clear. But this gets to the whole apology we talked about. They talked about apology to Ukraine, to Zelensky for what happened with the House of Commons standing ovations for Hunka. But Zelensky's completely fine with this stuff. There's tons of these examples of him being aligned with Nazi imagery. The real issue, of course, was always it was a celebration of killing Russians, and it was about Russophobia, and that came out, and very few people mentioned that. Interesting enough, the National Post had this front page piece that sort of hit on from a slightly different direction, but it said the Canadian Parliament, that the whole Canadian Parliament believed that there existed in the 1940s some proto-anti-Putin fighting force, and that the great cause of this moment has some direct lineage back to the fight of the 1940s. That's what it was. That's what it was. That's what Rhoda was doing. That's what the apologies after, that's what Trudeau's pseudo apologies continued on. This was about celebrating killing Russians, fighting Russia, weakening Russia, but the Nazigate has turned into, unfortunately, I mentioned it right away, I saw it developing right away, has turned into an anti-Palestinian affair. And on a personal note, there was a piece in the National Post 3 or 4 days ago that this Israel lobby guy published that basically said that it wasn't just the House of Commons that needed more vetting, it was university campuses. And he specifically cites me, that I basically should be banned from speaking at university campuses because Parliament gave 2 standing ovations to a former Nazi soldier. I, of course, was one of the people early on, before all of the Israel lobby groups got on board. I was one of the people denouncing the House of Commons standing ovations, and it took the Israel lobby groups, but a good 36 hours before the critics of the NATO proxy war were the only ones talking about it, for about 36 hours before elements of the establishment started turning. Anyways, basically, Palestinian supporters of Palestine should be shut down on university campuses because of Nazigate. That's what the column said. But it's more general, right? You know, and here this is predictable and understandable. Of course, you know, celebrating a Nazi, even if it was in no way meant to be anti-Jewish, it's of course very insensitive to the jury, who Canadian Jews or Jews elsewhere, who of course were targeted by the Nazi Holocaust. But it was principally anti-Russian, but our media sphere makes this, understanding World War II was so ignorant about it. There's no understanding there was 20 plus million Soviet citizens killed, right? There's no understanding, or very few people, maybe 1 in 10 Canadians know that, probably not even. Most Canadians know that there were 6 million Jews killed. Probably 1 in 1,000 Canadians know there were 20 million Chinese killed during World War II. So we have this very, and Hitler was viciously anti-Slavic and viciously anti-Soviet Union. That's part of why he was supported early on and he was a serious imperialist, a big, proponent of British imperialism, wanted to basically replace British imperialism with German. And, but we have such a, lack of understanding, and of course our anti-Russia sentiment makes where you can't even discuss this properly, and so the Nazigate basically gets left with this really exclusivist understanding of the horrors of Nazis, which is basically they were bad, they were horrendous to Jewry. And even the left did this, and I should make this really clear. A big chunk of the left did this, and I pointed out right away this is going to be anti-Palestinian. And I would say it goes beyond just anti-Palestinian. It's anti-left, because if you big up Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Law Center, B'nai B'rith, Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, those groups are going to try to destroy any effort at a left-wing socialistic movement, as they did with Jeremy Corbyn. They've tried it with people like Nikki Ashton, leftish NDP. That is invariably what's going to happen. We do not need to pretend like we don't know that's going to happen. That is what's going to happen. And so leftists should be very cautious about bigging up these organizations. Now, of course, someone like Taylor Noakes, who wrote about Nazigate, and he quotes, I think he quoted Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Law Center when he's publishing a Toronto Star article. In that context, the reality is the reality. If you want to get into Toronto Star, you need to quote one of these Jewish organizations. I get that. That's sensible. That's not, the Nazigate its importance is such that, you would, it makes sense to go for that. Now, conversely, when someone like Jeremy Appel, in his piece for the Orchard, Alberta publication, leftist in Alberta, he quotes Friends of Simon Wiesenthal, or it was B'nai B'rith, saying that the money that's gone to the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, it should go to Jewish studies and Holocaust education. That's bananas. That's bananas. Absolutely bananas that a leftist would quote that. This is not, again, we should go to Russian studies. This should go to World War II, anti-Slavic studies. This is to double down on this exclusivist understanding of the horrors of the Nazis is incredibly damaging. And I'll say, I don't think that what we're seeing now is it's only partly tied to that city, a very small part. We are seeing an absolutely stunning Israelism, anti-Palestinianism in Canadian politics, and Natsugate is a small contributor to this. I believe this. The fact this follows right after is not a coincidence. We have the Peace Tower in Ottawa yesterday, Israel's flag. We have just a little while ago, Premier Doug Ford of Ontario tweeted out, tonight, as people gather in Toronto in solidarity with Israel, Niagara Falls will be lit blue and white in honor of the lives lost at the hands of Hamas and the enduring strength of the Jewish people. Light over darkness, Ontario stands with Israel. So Niagara Falls, Peace Tower, there's other examples of Israel flags. We have all of the political parties, all of the leaders coming out with this Jewish suffering matters, Palestinian suffering doesn't, right? These statements of just totally unhinged. I mean, yeah, there was horrible things happened to many Israelis. There's no doubt about what happened with the rave. 250, 260 Israelis killed at a rave. Horrible. But there's what's happened already in Gaza is more horrible. I mean, it's basically as many Palestinians have been killed, and the level of fear and the level of just in the last 3 days, let alone going back, day 4 before the first Israelis were injured. Any way you analyze this conflict, the Palestinians, every number, Hamas took 100, 150 human shields or hostages, whatever you want to call it. Well, how many thousands of Palestinians are illegally detained in Israeli jails? How many, every time it's always, 50 to 1, as one person I was talking to earlier, worried that it's going to be, Israel's going to try to do 50 to 1. Well, there's going to be about 1,000 Israelis killed. That would put 50,000 Palestinians. That's probably not going to go that far, but there's going to be thousands and thousands of Palestinians killed in the coming days. And all of our politicians are endorsing that. Indirectly endorsing, and they know what they're doing. The police departments, the whole bunch of the police, RCMP, OPP, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, Calgary, Edmonton, they all had statements out. The first day, right away, hours on a Saturday of a long weekend, they all have tweets out about monitoring the situation in Israel. And so basically, Jewish communities in Canada were going to be under assault by the Palestinian hordes. That's what they were saying. They were criminalizing, already setting up criminalizing. The Toronto Police Department, as of a few hours ago, had more than 6 tweets already in like 48 hours, 72 hours, because there's demonstrations, right? Olivia Chow, the supposedly left-wing mayor of Toronto, just a completely unhinged tweet just today about basically it's illegal demonstration standing up for Palestinians. Calling on the police to monitor, basically calling on the police to shut down people protesting for Palestinian rights. Every single major human rights organization has said Israel's committing the crime of apartheid. 75 years of ethnic cleansing, more than half of a century of illegal, the Canadian government considers illegal occupation, more than 15 years of a siege of Gaza, and the baddies, the criminals, are those opposing Canada's contribution to Palestinian dispossession. It's absolutely remarkable. All the premiers across the country on Saturday, all of them, the opposition leaders in most provinces, they out statements about what happened in Israel. You have people like Bob Ray, Canada's ambassador to the UN, he's complaining that Médecins Sans Frontières put out a tweet criticizing Israel for blowing up an Indonesian hospital in Gaza they work with and an ambulance, and they killed a nurse. So this is Médecins Sans Frontières criticizing this, and he condemns them for not adding that that Hamas did as he put an unprovoked attack. An unprovoked attack. I mean, the guy's become addicted to using the word unprovoked with regards to Ukraine, that he's so like he could not possibly believe that anything going on with regards to the Palestinians in Gaza and Israel was unprovoked. I mean, Israel's slaughtered more than 6,500 Palestinians over the past 14 years in a whole series of wars. The siege. I mean, it's just absolutely unbelievable. The just ethos online. I haven't been watching that much of Canadian media, but certainly on social media, it's just unbelievable, the pro-Israelism. Now, a quick few words on Gaza and Canada's role. It was a Canadian, Charles Dobell, who after fighting during World War I, he conquered part of West Africa for the British and the French, and he actually became sort of a short-term colonial governor in West Africa. He later leads a British mission to capture Gaza. It's unsuccessful. Hundreds of Canadians fight with Allenby that capture Gaza. I think it's the third Gaza mission. So you got a century-long Canadian involvement in colonialism, imperialism in Gaza. And the most important part of understanding Canada's contribution to Palestinian suffering in Gaza is, of course, Canada's central role in the partition plan, which gave the Zionist movement at the UN, and I'm not going to get into Lester Pearson, Ivan C. Rand, a whole bunch of committees, and the United Special Committee on Palestine that goes to the region, comes up with a plan. Canadians play a really important role in all those phases of the UN partition plan. And that gives the Zionist movement the diplomatic cover for their ethnic cleansing. Well, most people in Gaza they're descendants of those who were ethnically cleansed, right? They were driven out of their homes in what is now, Israel. So they have some right to be angry with Israel. They have some right to do, quite frankly, they have some right to do some pretty bad things to Israelis, and that includes, killing civilians at a rave. That's clearly a war crime. That's of very dubious morality. But what in the world were people doing having a rave next to the open air prison? I mean, really, that's I mean, I clearly Israeli society is very comfortable with their oppression of Palestinians. Canada played a really important role in the division that leads to Hamas taking control of Gaza. Basically Americans, Israelis, Canada's in part after the legislative elections that Hamas wins in 2006, trying to break up the Palestinian Unity government. And then when Hamas takes control of Gaza, because they're basically the US, Israel, and Fatah are trying to take control themselves, that then justifies Israel's siege. So Canada plays an important role in that. And I wrote a piece that goes into some other examples of Canada's contribution to direct contribution to Palestinian suffering in Gaza. So that's all part of it that we should be discussing when we're talking about what's going on now and the horrors. These are going to be big horrors. I just before coming on, I was listening to Al Jazeera, and apparently there's a statement that came out from the US, France, Germany, Britain, and another country, just basically giving Israel carte blanche. The Secretary General of the UN, same thing. What we're hearing from Israeli officials, the defense minister calling Palestinians animals and boasting about cutting off food, fuel, electricity, whatever to Gaza. I mean, these are pretty close. These are pretty close to genocidal comments coming from a nuclear armed power, one of the most powerful militaries in the world. So this is happening. Another, just a little, maybe to conclude, there was the piece I saw someone on Twitter. Where does Hamas come from? People understand, of course, that Hamas was bolstered by Israel because it was viewed as a counterweight to the secular Palestinian Liberation Organization, and there's a piece that someone posted on Twitter from 1989 from the New York Times that explicitly talks about we should help the rise of Hamas, just kind of like as they did in Afghanistan, right, with supporting the Mujahideen against the secular Soviet-backed government. So yes, Hamas has an ideology that I don't certainly don't subscribe to many parts of it, but there are roots to this, and Israel and the U.S. and Canada, for that matter, have played some role in that ideology rising. I think I'll leave it at that, and if people have comments, questions, go ahead, and I will. I'll just see if Laura is here. Yeah, okay, I see Laura, and I will make Laura co-host. And I see Nadia. I'll let Nadia go ahead.
Hi, Yves, thank you for this presentation. I just don't understand if warfare doesn't work. Obviously, Israel is much more powerful than Hamas will ever be. Why then, two wrongs don't make a right? Why would you use again violence to justify your cause? Isn't there some other way? It seems to me that when apartheid in Africa happened, there was no way that Gandhi or Mandela were going to approve of violence or warmongering to prove their cause. There are other ways, perhaps diplomatic ways, or perhaps enlisting victimhood, or enlisting the sympathy of the whole world, or enlisting action against the injustice that is going on in Palestine, occupied territory. But I don't think that two wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah, I don't, unfortunately, I don't agree with almost all of what you said there. It's not historically based. I mean, South Africa, there was an armed resistance, and Mandela is very clear about his support for armed resistance. Whether they would have done, the same tactics that Hamas employed, you can discuss that out. But clearly, it was armed resistance, and the idea that colonialism has ended without armed resistance is just not based in fact. And if you look at the history of anti-colonial struggles, there's always been armed resistance, oftentimes very horrific response. If you ever look at what the Haitian Revolution, what those enslaved did in response, there's lots that's not very nice what they did, but clearly they were right in doing it. Maybe not every single instance, but at the macro level, they were clearly right in doing it. And that goes on and on and on. So I don't, unfortunately, violence does work. I don't think that's correct to say that violence doesn't work. I think we want to avoid violence whenever we can, but violence often does work. And there's many examples that show that. Now, specifically the Palestinians, I mean, that's kind of like what they did with the March of Return. Palestinians in Gaza in 2018 and 2019, they marched towards the fence in a non-violent way, in a civil society. We're going to try to tear this fence down, or even get close to the fence and do it in a non-violent way. And more than 200 were killed, and hundreds, maybe I think thousands, had their legs blown off. And Israeli snipers joked about how they got, I got 10 kneecaps today, and Israeli society basically celebrated it and cheered it on, and they even shot Canadian doctor Tarek Labani, and Canadian government said almost nothing about that. And doctor in a doctor suit, and everyone knew they didn't shoot him by chance. The Israeli snipers or have sitting at hilltops. They were not under threat. They were choosing their targets. So I don't in any way. I think Palestinians have a right to resist. They do under international law. They have a right to resist. Does that mean they have the right to fire on people at a rave? okay, that's a different story, but this is just the reality. So Israel just kills and kills and kills, and yeah, I mean, I think that we can take up criticism from this, like, if we weren't, and I would say we, I mean Canadians, Americans, whatever, if we weren't enabling all this, the Palestinians, like we have a lot more opportunities to engage in restricting Israel without, someone in Gaza has almost no ability to force Israel's hand besides things like they just did. We have actually much more ability, right? They're locked in a cage in Gaza, and so that's I think a moral comment on us, of internationalist minded people here who haven't done more to force the hand. We can't even get our Canadian government to stop having pizza parties for Canadians fighting in the Israeli military. I mean, right? So they assassinate, Israel assassinates or detains every Palestinian leader, any Palestinian leader that's, tries to be, I don't know what you want to call it, more progressive. They detain them. I mean, it's all the leftist, secularist Palestinian leadership is in jail, and so yeah, I mean, that's just the reality. We don't have to like it. I certainly don't like hearing about people being killed at a rave, but this is what it is, and I'm certainly not going to go out of my way to enable more injustice waged against those in Gaza, and which is any. Let's be honest here. At this point, anything that goes into condemning Hamas or even sort of worrying about Israel's victims, that's just a way of enabling more suffering for Palestinians. That's what it is, and we need to be, I think, pretty clear about that.
Diana, you're up next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I just want to say thanks very much, Eva. I so enjoy your program every week. I'm wondering about the timing with, so much US military being exhausted in Ukraine. And I don't know, it just seems like a very strategic time to be doing this, because Israel doesn't have the support. I've just, I don't know, been trying to figure that out a little bit, like how that all works. And, it was, no one saw it coming. And anyways, I'd just like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I myself am trying to figure that out. The obvious thing to me on that front is of course the normalization with Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. is of course overseeing a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia to begin diplomatic relations. And the U.S. is going to give nuclear technology to or a nuclear program to Saudi Arabia. Ostensibly, Israel was going to give something to the Palestinians to make it okay for Saudis to restart relations. So I think that's one geopolitical element at play. I think that obviously, if you look at what Israel's been doing to Palestinians in the West Bank, and this is the most deadly year in West Bank for more than 20 years. Israel's been killing tons of Palestinians. You got this extremist Jewish supremacist government in Israel that's been, pushing more and more violence, the pogroms, settler pogroms against Palestinians. That's all these things they've done with the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and provocative things from a Muslim perspective, and that was very clearly in Hamas's initial statements about why they did the operations. I think it's also, I know the Americans are trying to hype up the Iran element in all this. I think we'd be cautious with that, but I do also, there's Israel's assassinating a lot of people in Iran. There's bombs in Syria all the time, which ostensibly they say is about going after Iran. So is there Is this part of Iran? I think Iran does support Hamas. I don't know to exactly what extent. It's always difficult to get a sense of that because of how there is efforts to hype that kind of stuff. So that's going on. I do think this is big. The geopolitical implications of this are big. I mean, we also see, right, where there's four Hezbollah soldiers that were killed today. And there was some incursions from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad from Lebanon, and I think they said two killed. So there's Hezbollah has power. I mean, Hamas, they clearly pulled off of this was a huge coup from Hamas's perspective, the operation, but they don't have that much power. And everyone, this was a big surprise. Hezbollah, on the other hand, has power. Hezbollah can not just cost Israel not just a one-off kind of thing like Hamas seems to have pulled off, but a continued toll on Israeli society. So does if it leads to a war with Hezbollah, that's a whole other dynamic, and obviously Iran and Hezbollah have closer relations than with Hamas. So some of those dynamics, and then we've seen that the Americans sent not a naval vessel, one of the biggest naval vessels, whatever those are called again, aircraft carrier, I believe it was, just sent one to close to Israel and they warned countries in any country that might take advantage of the moment to attack Israel or whatever. So there's clearly some concern on those sort of bigger geopolitical questions. And did Hamas part of the calculation that the Americans are focused so much in the proxy war with Russia, and that they're less able to provide more weaponry to Israel? That could have been a part of the calculation. My inclination, to me, the Saudi Arabia normalization was definitely part of the calculation. I can't believe that it wasn't part of the calculation from Hamas's perspective. I don't know about the other elements.
Okay, Alan, you're up.
Yeah, just a comment that I wanted to make in regard to years ago, I bought a book that was written by a Brit, and he claimed that at the end of the Second World War, Winston Churchill wanted to take the German soldiers that fled to the West and march on Moscow. Well, to consider that the Soviet Union lost 90% of their young men during that the Second World War conflict, that tells a bit of a story there. They recognized that the Soviet Union had lost an awful lot. I guess it was something like 30% of their industry, of which they had very little. Furthermore, in 1980, I happened to be passing through doing some traveling. I was in Oslo, Norway, and I met a fellow who had been working for that organization, which in 1947 became the CIA. And he mentioned about at the meetings that took place at the end of the Second World War that there was all kinds of discussion about taking the Soviet Union on the part of the West, but what came up in the end was, but how in the world do we occupy the size of territory of the Soviet Union, which, when you included all of the various republics, all 15 republics, amounted to a territory greater than all of North America, and you can probably throw the Caribbean in and dip down into South America. That's how huge that territory was. So that's where that went. And yeah. Anyways, if you had any further comment on that, I'd like to hear that.
Well, I just think that with regards to the Nazi Gate specifically, that it's remarkable how little discussion there was about what the Nazis did to the Soviet Union, Russia, and it was also remarkable that this is all part of, like, Canada has been hostile to Russia for a century and a half and has seen Russia as a geopolitical competitor for all that period. And, you know, the dropping of the nuclear weapons in Japan was partly a threat to Moscow. So that's all like part of a history that is just kind of wiped out from that. And it's also part of the history of this NATO proxy war that we're, right? Again, not to justify what Russia's doing in Ukraine, but there's this aggressive policy targeting Russia that's never gone away. Does sort of, no matter what Russia does, doesn't go away. Even if it becomes an oligarchic capitalist place, there's still this hostility. Yeah.
Okay, Nahid, you're up.
Okay, thank you. One issue was brought up when I was listening to Democracy Now! And the panel discussion was obviously everybody's surprised at how the border security or surveillance was so weak, and the soldiers apparently they have been pulled away to the West Bank, and apparently Egyptians, they informed the Israelis about that threat a while ago. I mean, is it possible that also this was some sort of setup in order to justify this brutal, vengeful attack on Gaza? So that's something to consider. I'm also curious, Eve, about any update about your own experience about last year. You actually were physically assaulted at some sort of ultra-Jewish extremist conference. Have you any legal developments? And my last question, if you don't mind to elaborate more on that WIMI award and the WPS ambassador receiving it. When I looked online about WIMI award, they said nothing in relation to arms manufacturer kind of history. They talk about Scotiabank and that sort of thing. So I'm very curious because we have a meeting tomorrow about WPS and I want to be prepared. Thank you.
Yeah, just to go backwards. So the WIMI award is put out by the Conference of Defense Associations, which is like a century-old organization that was brought together by Department of National Defense of different, like I believe the Legion is part of it. There's like 50 at one point, at least there was like 50 different kind of militarist groupings that are part of it. And in more recent years, it's set up a kind of a think tank type thing that gets, I think, quite a bit of money. I'm not sure exact amounts, but quite a bit of money from arms companies. And so it's definitely a militarist affair, and that the fact that the women peace security ambassador would get that, would be chosen for that award and would accept it, I think just speaks to politics. In terms of my personal stuff, no, we didn't. I probably still have another few weeks, a month maybe, before I think I have a year deadline. We never did pursue the legal battle. I was assaulted by Rabbi Pupko while after interrupting the guy from UN Watch, who I'm forgetting his name right now, calling him an anti-Palestinian bigot. So we sent in a legal letter around telling them they had to keep the video, any video they had of the incident. And then I never really followed up with Dimitri to pursue. We were going to pursue a civil case, but I haven't actually done that. And at this point probably won't. With regards to the possibility, yeah, I mean, it's always possible that sort of Israel allowed this to happen, if you like, to justify doing what they're doing, or what something. That's always possible. I really have a hard time believing that on this one, specifically because this is obviously a huge disaster. I mean, I would presume that Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to be prime minister of Israel in 6 months, a year from now, because of this. This is going to have pretty big reverberations in Israeli politics for a long time. And I think it's I mean, it's possible. I mean, I think it's possible this leads to 50,000 Palestinians being killed in Gaza, and almost like another Nakba. And it's also possible that this leads to rattling Israeli society and saying, oh, well, there's going to be a cost. We can pretend that we're just going to go along and maintain Palestinians in their prison in Gaza and constrained in the West Bank, and just keep but this is a big cost. So I think both of those things are possible. I really no idea. I think that's up for play, and it's based partly upon what people do in Canada, the US, and elsewhere in terms of getting out in the street and denouncing Israeli violence and Canadian complicity and stuff like that. So I very much doubt this was sort of like the Israeli government or security apparatus wanted this to happen, but that is always possible.
Hey, Yuri.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All righty. Well, Eve, I just want you to respond to these two quick things, which is, how much faith do you have in the international community? And I'm not talking about the Western governments, but for months we've been hearing nonstop from lefties that we do respect about how multipolarity is going to save us all. But meantime, you had Saudi Arabia, normalizing relationships with Israel. Modi, we were discussing in the chat, stood in solidarity with Israel. And I think Russia a few months ago even said that they were going to open up their embassy in Jerusalem. And China, mostly just diplomatically, they say that they want negotiations, that they are for Palestinians, but most of the times they don't do what the people power movements want, which is BDS, until Israel finally adopts a democratic one-state secular solution. So I'm curious your response to that. And that also is tied in with Haiti, which is constantly thrown under the bus, in which China and Russia didn't veto this disgusting assault that's about to be unleashed on Haiti. So I'm curious your response to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you asked the right question on that stuff, and I think Haiti, in some ways, is a clearer example. They won't even veto a resolution because Haitians have so little power, right? At least on Palestine, they will say sort of rhetorically some decent stuff, and will vote for UN resolutions that uphold Palestinian rights, like Russia and China and other countries that are viewed as somewhat like outside of the Western bloc. But I don't think. I mean, I think this is the world of international affairs is based upon power, and Palestinians don't have that much of it, and so it's easy to throw them under the bus, and Haitians have even less, so it's even easier to throw them under the bus.
Hey, Wendy.
Yeah, it's not really a question, but it's hard to contain the outrage that you feel about what's going on. Canadians are all in favor of Dutch resistance during the war and French resistance in the war, but when it comes to the Palestinian resistance to colonial, anyway, so there's that. But just to toss in a local angle, we just had an election here in Manitoba, and people were thinking, even on the left, well, anything's got to be better than the Conservatives. So the NDP got in, and quite a bit of celebration about that because the Tories were out. And, Wab Kinew, without thinking, or maybe he was thinking, just immediately jumped to denouncing Israel with no context about what they've been doing to Palestine all this time. And I was talking to a fellow from Independent Jewish Voices about how outrageous this is and how many people who were campaigning for the NDP are writing letters to complain. But he said, we talked to him specifically when he was one of the unanimity of the Manitoba legislature in approving the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. So it's not like he doesn't know. He's a smart guy and he knows. So, just don't trust the NDP on foreign policy ever.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's across, if you look at the, was it Rachel Notley, was it the Saskatchewan opposition, Rachel Notley being the opposition and NDP opposition in Alberta. I think in Saskatchewan I looked as well. Oh, and in Ontario, I'm forgetting the woman's name right now, but they put out statements all basically kind of the same, even in opposition, even when they're not premier. I mean, Wab Kinew at least sort of had Ebby and the BC NDP premier but also Jagmeet Singh's statement is terrible. Heather McPherson, who's actually been sort of doing some okay stuff on Palestine, it just complete. I mean, I think there was a way for the sort of political reality, and while sort of simultaneously, if you take what Haaretz editorial, way better than all of the NDP kind of official left kind of position. Haaretz editorial said, Israel is partly to blame for this, yeah, it's pretty intense. I mean, but then again, if you go back to 2014 or 2009, I forget all the specifics, but the previous just onslaughts against Gaza, one of them was there was 13 Israelis killed. There was 1,400 Palestinians, and if you go back, they were all defending Israel at the time. It's even when there's not even any Israelis killed, the fact there's some Israelis killed now, there's just, that the outpouring but yeah.
I had put my hand up just to ask a question I often ask because I'm sitting in the US, and I know it's a silly question, I know the answer, but you can answer it anyway, so someone sent me a couple of things where CNN did a couple of pieces actually giving the Palestinian perspective with good, Barghouti and somebody else. I mean, it was short, 9 minutes each, but this was, of course, the only thing amidst all the other pro-Israel stuff that's constantly on, apparently. But I'm just wondering, I'm sure I know this, but in Canada, has there been any airing of the Palestinian perspective?
I don't know. I watched the CBC, the National. The papers haven't really come out because of the holiday. And so I haven't really, and I've been mostly kind of just on Twitter fighting with the Zionists on Twitter and following sort of, the pro-Palestinian perspective on Twitter. But my guess is that there's very little, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay, so Glenn, I think this is our last question, Glenn.
No, I'm just want to point out that Nadia has her hand up in the screen, but it's kind of difficult to see. That's all I want.
Yeah, I think that was just left up from her earlier question. Nadia, did you have a second question? No, I didn't think so. Yeah, thank you though, Glenn.
Thank you, Bud.
Okay.
Well, Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. And if there's demonstrations, the pro-Palestinian demonstrations, there was also a good NATO demonstration here in Montreal, but if there's any demonstrations, make sure to get out to those. Thanks, everyone. Have a good, nice week. Night.
Thanks, Eve.
Sure.